Welcome to Chandwell. My name's Michael, and as well as building this model of a rundown West Yorkshire town, I'm also spending the next 12 months building an N-scale model of Bradford Cathedral. Now, I showed the general plans for how I'm going to build the building in my last video, but since then I've completed the card mock-up. This is just a tool to enable me to work out whether I've got all the proportions right and work out how the whole thing's going to fit together. So in this video I'm going to show you how I went about making this card mock-up and talk about some of the fascinating things that I learnt along the way. If you'd like to see this mock-up for real, as well as any progress I'm making on the real building, then I'll be doing a talk at the Cathedral's Heritage Open Day on Saturday the 14th of September, entitled Smaller Scale, Wider Perspective. Tickets are free, so if you're interested in coming along to the Cathedral on the 14th of September, please do see the details in the description of this video. By drawing the model's plan in Inkscape, I knew that it was going to be 48 cm long by 26 cm wide. But I wanted to get a real feel for just how big that would be. To get the best effect of seeing the cathedral built into its hillside, I'll be modelling some of the surrounding ground too. Something like this. I tiled this over 8 sheets of A4 and printed it onto cheap copier paper. I cut away the margins and used PVA glue to tile the sheets together. I now started to understand just how large this model was going to be. I cut around the edges and was left with the footprint of the final model. It doesn't even fit on Chandwell at all. As I was working on this ground, I was beginning to think about all the different things that have happened on the ground in Bradford where the cathedral has stood and evolved over all those years. So I asked Maggie Myers, the cathedral's Director of Education and Visitors, to tell us something about it.
And in this wall here is an old Saxon stone. So this is a wall from the late 1300s, and it has in it a stone that was found in the 1800s when they were building the transepts. And that stone was put into this old wall. This old wall has been repaired and redone during the Morph extension, but it has this piece of Saxon stone in it. So there's a piece of Saxon stone in a wall from the 1300s that has then been remodelled and redone in the 1960s. So this is Bradford Cathedral, all ages, all times, all mixing together. So it's quite good.
So onto the mock-up. I thought I'd start with the tower. I've spent the most amount of time on getting the tower just right, and I showed the process I used in my last video. I printed these drawings onto A4 sticky labels and broke out my stack of empty cereal boxes that I use for just this purpose. The label sticks directly onto the cereal box, and then I cut it out with my scalpel. I use lots of light strokes. This saves my hand from aching and gives much cleaner cuts. It's much safer than trying to drag a sharp knife through thick card in one go. I take care to cut out the steps in the buttresses and the individual spires along the top parapets. In 2 of the sides I cut 0.7mm wide slits halfway down from the top, and in the other 2 the slits go from the bottom up. This allows me to slot the sides together like this. And that's all there was to it. I tested it on the plan from earlier, and I put it on Chandwell to get a sense of its size compared to the buildings in the town. This thing is really going to be large. The more I look at the cathedral, the more I find things that really interest me, and they must have felt like this in the 1950s when they put the extension on, because they've found some various bits and pieces from the old churches over time and put them in the walls of the new. Here's Maggie with some details.
So here we've got another mixture of the old and the new. We're in the extended bit of the building now. When they were digging up this bit of the building, they found some things in the old building and some things around. So here's another piece of a Saxon stone. It's a different Saxon stone, but it is still from that era. So another cross from another time. We have an old, this is called a piscina, and it's like a holy sink really. So this is something that in medieval times they would have washed the plate and the chalice, and this was on the south side of the old chancel. It had been covered up for some time, but Morph decided that he wanted to put it here in this wall. And then we've also got something that they found, which is a pair of shears, and they believe that this perhaps might be from the second church that was here, perhaps above the doorway of the guild chapel. So we've got 3 items here that again belong to a different time.
The purpose of the serial packet mock-up is to work out whether I have the overall dimensions correct and to work out how the final model will go together. It does not need to be high quality. I tend to print the parts out as one net, with tops and bottoms to help hold the shape. Here with the wings, I just score and fold. And I end up with a little box representing the part of the building. For a reverse turn like in the wings, I made 2 little slices at the ends of the line. You can just see them here. I'll flip it over and then score on the reverse. This leaves a lovely crisp S-fold. I score the rest, fold and glue around the shaping piece, and then glue into place. I use weights to hold it straight and level as the glue dries. There are going to be 24 individual elements to the build, and as you look closer, you can tell that each bit tells a story of its own, each part being added at a different time in the building's history. I spotted a blocked off door, and I asked Maggie what that was all about.
So I'm in an area of the cathedral that most people don't come into. We sort of call it a listening room. It's a sort of a storage area. And this used to be outside. So where I am would have been outside. In Morph's time, it's now covered over. And just behind me is an old doorway. And it's now bricked up. This was the doorway by which the Bollings and the Tempests used to come into their area of the church, which was known as the Bolling Chapel. And after the Reformation, even the Tempests, because the Bollings married into the Tempests, they used to come into the chapel by their own entrance here. So this is now bricked up. It's yet another feature that has kind of been included in the new bit of the building. Once outside, now inside, little quirky doorway. Most people don't see it, but if you ask, you can come and see it. There you go.
Over the course of about a month, I made my way around the cathedral part by part. With the tower and the wings done, I added the nave. I just folded it together and used tape to hold it as the glue dried. It grew and grew. The mock-up helps me be sure that I know the best way to construct the model, and I can see what overlaps what and where. Everything was just crudely glued on. The porches are a best guess, as I've not measured these up yet. The cathedral was extended in the 1950s and 60s by the architect Sir Edward Morph. I was looking forward to the extension as it is really complicated looking and it has an interesting roofline. I asked Maggie to tell us a little bit about the extension.
From when the parish church was first built up until the 1960s, the end of the building was just behind me here where the first big archway is. When the extension went in the 1960s, this east end of the cathedral, that's where the extension was down there. There was a stained glass window in there. It was the first stained glass window to go into the building. It was the Morris & Co. one that was put in 1863. So when they built the extension, they packed up all of that glass, they built the extension, and they put that glass back at the extreme end that you can see down there. It was one flat window originally. When it was resited, it became 3 windows. Very clever.
Before I started to design and mock up the extension, there was one niggling thing that needed to be sorted out. On my very first visit to the cathedral, I struggled to get a video of the building looking straight down from the front to the back. The back part seemed to be wonky no matter where I stood. 2 viewers even pointed out this to me on my last video. Look, the outline I found from Bradford Council goes a bit wonky here at the back. What's going on? Is this just sloppy 1950s architecture or building? I asked Maggie to explain.
So as you look down the building, you might notice that it's not completely straight. The nave to the chancel, the bit behind me was originally the chancel at the end of the nave, now been extended by Morph, but there is a slant. And lots of medieval churches have this slant from nave to chancel. And there are all sorts of reasons, people have had all sorts of theories as to why, often known as a weeping chancel, because it's not entirely straight. And the original theory was that this was to represent Christ's head going to one side on the cross. There's been all sorts of theories about it over hundreds of years, but actually in about the last 50 years or so, they have done quite a lot of research where they've measured the angle of the nave and the chancel, and actually they've found that there's all sorts of different variations they can't say, yes, it is to do with the sunrise on Easter morning, or yes, it is to do with Christ's head going to one side. And so actually it's kind of lost in history. What they do say is that it appears to be deliberate, that all these churches where the nave and the chancel are out of alignment, it's not kind of an error. There are too many of them, and so it was a deliberate reason that they were done like that, but the actual reason itself has kind of lost in the fog of time. So again, it's quite intriguing. So Morph, when he added on the extension, he's honoured that that slant in our building. He was a person who liked the stories, liked the symbolism, liked the older aspects, and obviously wanted to put his modern stamp on it. But he's honoured our slight slant, and so it retains the slant.
That was fascinating. If you're interested to learn more about weeping chancels and the study that was done into it, then I've put a link in the video's description. So, with this in mind, I drew the cathedral sections all straight to start with. It's much easier to work with rectangles that are 90 degrees to the page. So I made sure that all the overlapping parts were right and that all the dimensions were correct. Only then did I introduce the slant. In Inkscape, I dragged the weeping part to one side, and then I rotated the whole thing by 1.5 degrees. I dragged this back and decided to use this point here at the northwest corner of the lantern tower as the anchor point. So once I'd done that, I now had a gap of 3mm down here and an overlap of almost 2 up here. I spent time, far more than should have been necessary, using the node tool in Inkscape to rearrange everything. I decided to make the extension the parts with the slanty walls, except for the lantern tower. I wanted that to be completely square. So the nave was adjusted to meet it. I ended up adjusting some parts of the extension and some parts of the original building, and I did various different combinations until I found something that worked quite nicely to my eye. With that done, I rotated the whole thing back again, which makes the model much easier to work with. Here's a tip when working with abutting shapes like this. Switch Inkscape into the outline display mode. This turns every shape into a simple outline so you can see if you have any lines that don't touch properly. So with the extensions weeping sorted out, it was a case of continuing to print, cut, fold and stick each of the 23 parts. Each one builds on the one underneath it, and the layered nature of the whole building becomes apparent. I had a bit of a faff with the curved bit down in the southeast corner, but with some rolling and some super glue, I got there in the end. There's no doubt that this is my most ambitious model to date, but I think I'm up for the challenges that lie ahead of me. There might not be a video for a couple of weeks because I really need to write that talk that I'm giving on the 14th of September. I do hope you can come and see me on that day and see how I'm getting on. But regardless of that, whether you come or you don't, please look forward for the next video when I'll be starting to make the nave. So until then, thank you for watching this one, take care, and I'll see you next time.